When Alone in the Dark created the prototype for the 3D survival horror genre, Frédérick Raynal's team under Infogrames created a very hard act to follow.
I'm the fucking universe!
And that wasn't the best way to pay homage. PS1 Goliaths like Resident Evil essentially emulated AITD's original formula for years. Even Infogrames' own attempts to reboot their pivotal series failed to innovate beyond the cinematic flourishes Capcom had instilled. In 2004, 1 year before the 4th installment of Resident Evil further evolved the survival horror genre, David Nadal, co-founder of V-Rally developer Eden Games, dreamed of bringing Alone in the Dark back. Not as a copy of what had come before, but to invoke what made that 1992 original so groundbreaking. He wanted to revolutionize the genre and possibly fork off their own, what Hervé Sliwa, lead game director, dubbed survival action. If you know anything about 2008's disastrous Alone in the Dark entry, then you would think they failed. But that's what's most surprising about this story. For how unfortunate the game turned out, the innovations they made, they did leave a mark on survival games. Diegetic inventory, searching for items in first person, a believable grounded crafting system, adherence to real-life rules and immersion for the sake of immersion, a high degree of environmental interaction, physics-based destructibility, episodic television-style story delivery with chapter select, and the one they were proud of the most, advanced fire technology. Individually, these systems went on to inspire, or at the very least beat to market, developers around the world. And yet, in their pursuit of greatness, Eden Games fell victim to a classic. It isn't how good your ideas are, it's how well you execute them. Alone in the Dark 2008 is undoubtedly a AAA game, offering all the blockbuster set pieces intended to thrill gamers. They just forgot two cardinal rules. 1. The game must be fun, and 2. If you're going to create a sequel, don't completely distort a character beyond recognition.
So many questions.
Then I suppose you're the answer man, shithead?
What the hell is even that?
How did a developer lauded for redefining the open world driving genre with Test Drive Unlimited go on to make one of the worst received games of the 7th generation just 2 years later? And what about that game, from its presentation, gameplay innovations and story, made it so ahead of its time? Welcome to the complete retrospective and analysis of Alone in the Dark 2008.
Jwlar.
The 7th gen had gotten off to a slow start. Sure, there were pivotal releases in Halo, COD, Assassin's Creed and Oblivion et al. Still, many of the games to this point were stuck in cross-gen. Xbox games released at higher resolutions on their big brother. The PlayStation 3 promised to speed the foray into HD gaming along, although as vintage memes prove, that still took time. 2008 truly marked the cusp of the 7th generation. Making the switch for console gamers wasn't just recommended, it was required if you wanted to play the latest and greatest. A powerhouse year, 2008 saw the releases of Grand Theft Auto 4, Fallout 3, Metal Gear Solid 4, Dead Space, Left 4 Dead, and Mirror's Edge to name a few. Whatever your personal opinion on any of these titles, undoubtedly gamers were living well, no matter their preferred genre. And here was Alone in the Dark, ostensibly able to stand among those Goliaths. Previews were well received, journalists were hyped with what they saw, and the tech demos impressed. Yet it still had a sister last-gen game sharing its release date, highlighted the delays the game went through where it should have released during a period where a PS2 edition made more sense, and underlining that their publisher was doing all it could to cash in, as they often did. It's the as hated as it should be bad guy of gaming, the rebranded Atari SA. Infogrames had already made a bad name for themselves, as discussed in the retrospective for the 1992 entry, pushing Raynal away from his baby and forcing out 2 rushed sequels simply to cash in on being one of the first in 3D gaming, only to oversaturate their own monopoly in just 3 years. Unfortunately for the game development firms of France, if it wasn't Infogrames publishing your game, it's Ubisoft. Neither are exactly paragons of the industry. Having acquired the rights to Atari's brand from a struggling Hasbro in late 2000, Infogrames soon cashed in on the heritage, releasing Atari collections to every console under the sun, and within 2 years rebranding themselves to pull the wool over the eyes of the unsuspecting consumer. To those not in the know, Atari SA looks to be the grandfather of gaming back from the dead, when in reality it's a greedy corporation wearing a zombified skin, hoping to sell a few extra copies off the back of historic brand goodwill. Their acquisition of Hasbro Interactive followed an overly aggressive and, in hindsight, ill-conceived bid to consolidate their position as the most prominent gaming publisher in the world. They spent the latter half of the 90s buying up whomever they could, at one point holding on to the Unreal, Civilization, Rollercoaster Tycoon, Driver, and Duke Nukem brands, as well as exclusive licensing rights for Dungeons & Dragons and all Warner Bros. Tie-in games. If you were to look at some of the less well-received entries to some of those brands, it should be no shock that they will hold the mark of the devil. During this period of intense growth, they fully acquired Eden Studios, having been their exclusive publisher for the successful run of V-Rally games. Founded by 2 Infogrames employees, David Nadal and Jean-Yves Geoffroy, the newly renamed Eden Games had a lineage of modest racing games before finding major success after Atari purchased the Test Drive IP. Test Drive Unlimited in many ways mirrors the ahead-of-its-time nature of Alone in the Dark 2008, and it's understandable why they believed a similar approach of breaking barriers would strike gold twice. With a humongous open world set on a realistically scaled Hawaiian island, it too added realism for the sake of immersion, even when it may not make much sense for an arcade racing game. Minor features include, but aren't limited to, starting and turning off the engine, clothing and house shopping, the raising and lowering of car windows, diegetic changing of the in-game radio volume, and adjusting the seat position within the car. These don't sound like much, but with its comprehensive online features, it blew my mind back on the Xbox 360, fulfilling the role of the immersive sim open-world driving game I never knew I wanted. It's no wonder that when studio head Nadal approached Atari with his idea of bringing that same highly immersive, realism-focused approach to survival horror, they were happy to pass on the torch of the Alone in the Dark franchise. Nadal's goal was clear. The new Nightmare failed because it was chasing Resident Evil. They needed to renew the brand and make something different, pitching a truly innovative game, invoking the same sense of originality as its ancestor. With 112 employees in 2008, spread across 2 floors of office space, they were undoubtedly a large AAA game developer for the period. Atari was confident that, with enough time, money, and a boatload of marketing, Eden Games would be the company to succeed in bringing the 3D survival horror genre home. Hervé Slira may have seemed an odd choice for lead game designer. He was very young for the role and only had experience in games that were not horror focused, as lead designer on puzzle platformer Looney Tunes Sheepdog and Wolf, and leading a third-person action-adventure platformer in Eden Games' first foray away from racing games, with 2003's Kaya Dark Legacy. A commercial failure, that game also performed reasonably well with critics and has garnered a cult following. When Atari inevitably cancelled Kaya's sequel, it spurred Nadal into seeking a new IP to replace their attempts at branching out from the bread-and-butter racing titles. Slira's quiet but determined passion for devising novel gameplay ideas comes across in his interviews, especially in his native language. His track record was by no means terrible, but I can't help but feel that a lack of experience in horror games hurt him, as would Eden Games' lack of quality control or technical talent. It's challenging to place the blame on which one, so let's say both, as the criticisms levied against Kaya, they are word for word the downfalls of Alone in the Dark 2008, a spotty camera, imprecise controls, and a poor script. Whatever they learned from that development cycle, it wasn't how to solve those problems. Still, Slira was brimming with ideas, notably to create a game with a massive sense of immersion and environmental interaction without slowing narrative pace. They wanted to follow real-world rules as much as possible, adding interactable elements wherever they could, even if they had little to do with affecting gameplay outside of immersion, such as toggling headlamps, the center console lights, the radio, and so forth in a car. Rather than have the player access a large amount of offensive weapons, everyday items that litter the world space will be the arsenal at their disposal, where the player's creativity is their primary weapon, either in crafting or using the environment to their advantage, solving various puzzles and action scenarios differently depending on what's available.
The most important element in the game is the variety. So what we want is to provide a very, very variety game to the player. So to have lots of different action, not to have lots of repetitive pattern of gameplay.
Avoiding repetition was important, and apart from an open world section that destroys the game's momentum, Eden Games achieved this. While it can be broken down into platforming, combat, rappelling, puzzle solving, driving, climbing, and a variety of mini-games, it's how they're strung together and the general fast pace that keeps the game feeling fresh, if not closer in style to something like Uncharted 2 than a survival horror. The team's past comfort with creating action-focused games likely influenced this decision, although as producer Noor Poloni correctly states, that was the direction the survival horror genre was taken at the time, in direct response to Resident Evil 4's unprecedented success. To achieve this, every part of the game was highly scripted to provide maximum thrill and high pace for the story. Watching these interviews, pace is a regular word. It seems the team believed momentum was essential to keep players engaged, but it's that relentless forward drive that works against it, where the story segments and cutscenes feel rushed, not necessarily in their quality, but in how much time the player has to digest them. They want to keep things moving too fast, often to their detriment. Take this cutscene for example. The man on the floor, Fearfile, is spitting out his lines with little nuance or space between them.
I'm so glad you're back, Edward. They attacked us. I managed to lose Crowley. Hide here, but he'll come back for the stone. My God, I never thought I'd see your face again.
Either the direction was poor, or the scenes were edited to minimize as much downtime as possible. Based on what we know about this obsession with high pace, it feels more like the latter. Alongside paying homage to the original in trying to be equally innovative, there's also the main through point, the protagonist himself, Edward Comby. Where The New Nightmare was a complete reboot, Alone in the Dark 2008 is technically Alone in the Dark 4, a direct sequel to the original trilogy. This is Comby, the ginger-haired, mustachioed paranormal investigator of the 1920s. You'd think I'd be upset at the character assassination that has occurred. He went from
I kept myself from grinning at the thought of my banker's surprise.
to
I've grown tired of chasing you, Carnby. You should have been dead long ago. Sorry, punctuality is one of my strengths.
It is indignant, but Infogrames had already started the character down this dark road in 2 and 3, where the Lovecraftian-inspired character in over his head had turned into an Indiana Jones-esque action star. This immortal being, seemingly inspired by both Supernatural stars Jared Padalecki and Jensen Ackles, was the inevitable conclusion following this arc. If you can't tell, I'm not a fan of 2 and 3, and while they can't take all the blame for this new character direction, it isn't as wild a change from what had already occurred after Raynal moved away from the series. Given Edward's history, which ended circa 1940, an approach mirroring Marvel's Captain America would fit better, as a man out of time, rather than a complete amnesiac. Had the game been released in the mid-2010s, I'm sure the writing would have mirrored that form of popular media instead. Then again, Marvel-style quips every 5 minutes wouldn't be any better than this.
I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm not. But we don't really have much choice now, do we?
Who can be blamed for 2008's further twisting of Comby is Atari's marketing. Nadal openly admits that what the developers wanted, an older, more jaded man with shorter hair, was twisted into the supermodel on the front cover. Although with how the final in-game 3D model turned out, I like to think the devs fought back. Comby isn't ugly, but this isn't the smooth-featured youngster from the box art. It apparently took many meetings to finalize this look, and insights like these into the issues developers face with publishers reminds us that bad games often cannot be blamed on one problem. Let's think of it in terms of James T. Reason's Swiss cheese model. Initially designed to highlight how accidents can occur within aviation, engineering, healthcare, and emergency services, it applies, with a little tweaking, to game development as well. Each layer of cheese illustrates a line of defense that lies between a bad game. These can be each development team, the management, the publisher, the quality control department, and so on, each one put in place to ensure a good final product. Every layer, however, has flaws that, if aligned, can allow mistakes or poor decisions to slip through. Flaws could be anything from developer apathy, overbearing management, a lack of talent, time constraints, budget constraints, and so forth. In this diagram, 3 issues are stopped by the defenses, but 1 passes through where the holes are lined up. For Alone in the Dark 2008, a consistent hole would be the insistence on innovation above all else. While that headstrong approach led to the elements of the game that impressed me, it also resulted in those that make the game substandard. Consider one of the most controversial decisions, basing the game around the media delivery method of television. Atari was excited by this prospect, as it would allow them to distribute the game digitally in an episodic format, an approach that Telltale Games went on to use extensively until it eventually sank the company. Phil Harrison, a corporate exec who was a member of the original Sony PlayStation team, briefly worked at Atari in the late 2000s, and rightly states that when Eden Games proposed the idea in 2004, it was visionary. They eventually moved away from it for creative, technical, and commercial reasons, and they should be glad they did. Despite being a critical failure, AITD 08 sold well. However, if the episodes had released individually, there was no chance that more than a dedicated few players would have continued after episode 2. It was Eden Games' break time shenanigans that further inspired the episodic nature, where they binged TV shows such as Lost, 24, and Prison Break. Talking to Game Reactor, Poloni explained that games at that time were built around a film structure, 2 hours of story content spread across 8 hours of gameplay. Players would find themselves growing bored with the story or not see it as necessary. By mimicking a television structure, they could fit 8 hours of story into a 10 to 15 hour game, maintaining a riveting pace and ensuring players remained invested. Poloni is right that a movie structure is not ideal for a video game, although later story-based games have proven that the medium needed to develop its own method of storytelling rather than relying on previously established forms, as Eden Games' TV style falls flat too. Of course, it was ahead of its time, beating Alan Wake to market by 2 years, which used a similar approach and even utilized the same voice actor, James McCaffrey.
You represent the part of Alan Wake that is capable of rational thought and planning, which is why I'm talking to you.
From the main menu, episodes can be accessed at any time, even before you have played them in a chronological order, with a previously on video sequence filling the player in.
Previously on Alone in the Dark.
Television shows that used this usually ran on a Monster of the Week structure with a general arching background plot, ensuring that missing a few episodes didn't leave viewers high and dry with no idea of what was going on. AITD 2008 is a linear story with crazy plot points. Unsurprisingly, these video sequences do nothing to enlighten the player unless they have already played the game up to that point, which raises the question of why these episodes were unlocked from the very beginning. It's as if Atari accidentally released preview copies of the game to the public, copies designed to impress journalists with the more bombastic sequences, or skip parts of the game that were too difficult, and in some ways, that's correct. Speaking the game aside, Poloni explained that the intention wasn't for players to skip around the episodes at random, stating you wouldn't skip to the end of a DVD of 24, you watch it through. If players skip straight to the end, the only person they're cheating is themselves. Chapter Select exists to give players the freedom to skip sections they find too difficult or tedious. If they don't like puzzles, for example, they can skip that part. The same with combat if that is too challenging. It's there to massage away gripes. If, for example, I say that the combat is clunky and not fun to engage with, which I will when we come to it, Eden Games now has a valid comeback. I can just skip that section if I don't like it. That doesn't remove my criticism, however. It's just an attempt for the developers to wash their hands of any concerns they disagree with. As Poloni said, the only person they're cheating is themselves, so why let them skip so far ahead in the first place? Surely unlocking only the next chapter at a time would make more sense. I randomly jumped into a chapter from the last episode and suddenly I'm presented with some voodoo priest and a driving sequence with a highly constrained time limit. All the while the game is trying to teach tutorials because it knows this is the first time I have ever booted up anything. It's the design equivalent of a friend telling us to start watching Breaking Bad just as Walter meets the vacuum salesman. That would only make it confusing for ourselves. So why give the option in the first place? Across multiple console generations, playing a game linearly and unlocking the ability to go back after completing a part of it was the assumed best practice. Bucking this trend was a means of forced innovation against better judgment. No one else is doing it, so it must be a good idea. No one else has done it yet for a reason. I will admit, as the modern equivalent of a gaming journalist, I feel like I threw up in my mouth comparing myself to them, the ability to jump to a specific part to grab some relevant footage without needing to use a cheat code, console command, or play through the game again was invaluable. Which answers my exasperated question as to why it was added, to ensure as good a reception amongst players as possible. Eden Games originally devised the idea after performing extensive market research following Kaya, concluding that the number of people who actually finish games is really small. If someone is paying £50, they're not getting all of the content back and don't get to see it or experience it all.
Well, what we really want the people to feel when playing Alone in the Dark is that this will be the first game that they will be able to really finish.
By allowing players to skip back and forth at will, it would theoretically ensure that all players feel they got their money's worth and are happier with the final product. That wouldn't be the case, however, if much of the game is mediocre at best. Atari had a lot riding on Alone in the Dark. It was going to be the last of their old approach. With Harrison now leading the publisher, he had concluded that the era of the single-player game was dying, that a relatively linear single-player game without online connectivity is going to be a challenge to greenlight going forward. Harrison was a part of the corporate vanguard enacting this across the industry. Without network connectivity, an online mode, or a clear DLC strategy, no game would pass the planning stage. It's why even historically single-player games like Assassin's Creed or Far Cry suddenly had online modes added. It's not proven, but I wouldn't be surprised if this mentality had led Atari to push the game out the door too early. As we'll come to see, with some more time in the oven, there's a potentially good game here. Not a good Alone in the Dark game, but certainly an action-adventure title that could rival Naughty Dog. Eden Games probably weren't the team capable of fulfilling that. They had already missed their delayed deadline of March 2008. A further 3-month delay isn't much, but it highlights how appalling the game must have been in March when bugs like these were considered acceptable. Doomed from the start, AITD 08's over-ambition in trying to match the innovation of a game that effectively pioneered a genre led to catastrophe, and the marketing didn't help one bit. Atari sold the game as the next great thing, inviting journalists to highly polished previews and releasing tech demos, trying to promote Eden Games' in-house Twilight 2 engine as a technology other developers would be eager to adopt. Atari must have observed the success of Epic's Unreal Engine and its Quake engine and saw dollar signs when they thought they had a contender on their hands. The call to action at the end of this press release made me laugh. From the looks of it, we won't see the last of Twilight. Any wild guesses as to what Eden Games will dish out next? They released only one more game using it, Test Drive Unlimited 2. Alone in the Dark was ahead of its time in more ways than one, being one of the first overhyped games that languished when players finally got their hands on what was supposed to be a revolution. Previews advertised the game's adherence to real-life rules, selling all the best features that still impress in the final game. Episode 1 introduced the inventory and crafting system, where double-sided tape is used with a glow stick to create a portable light that can be attached to a wall, or piercing a blood pack with a knife to create an item to lure away enemies, highlighting how inventory items can interact with the environment and be combined, a modern representation of basic adventure game style puzzle solving. Episode 2 demonstrates the capabilities of the fire technology, the lighting tech behind it, and how it interacts with the game world and environmental objects, while showcasing the Havoc object physics and their use for reactive gameplay, like shooting a table leg causes it to break off, creating an item that can be picked up and used as a club, or lit on fire to make a torch. And episode 4 introduces the enemy types, what they look like and how to defeat them, ended on the quote, "Everything in the environment can be used as a weapon." Live reporting from press events had Polony exclaiming that the story would surpass the competition and no longer be hamstrung by its medium, thanks to the use of plot twists, a stronger series structure, and cliffhangers, as well as how the fire is completely non-scripted, which, while true in rare cases, most other times it very much is scripted. And even during these previews, journalists noticed some of the issues with the writing. None of this is false advertising, but it's still disingenuous, as much of what they show is rarely used in gameplay. There is no need to create a pierced blood pack in crafting, as enemy AI is far too focused on the player to fall for any distractions, and the glow stick is only needed in one repeating scenario. It's not that you won't be doing what the videos showed, it's that none of it is an integral part of the game, nor the most memorable parts. You'll spend far more time wrestling the controls or laughing at the ridiculous story than you will shooting a table leg. Even the box had to resort to using review scores from the least reputable sources possible, pornographic lads mag Maxim and men's fashion magazine FHM. Because when I think of survival horror, I think of torn jeans and breasts. Then there's the generic man looking off into the distance that polluted the mid-2000s and 2010s. What a fall from grace from these compositions. Come June 2008, D-Day had arrived, and the reality of Alone in the Dark 2008 being anything but a defective product could no longer be hidden. It was in the players' hands and they were not happy. Old forum posts online were flooded with people disappointed with the game, yet it found somewhat of a cult audience. Those who, like me, appreciate the mechanics, but also enjoy the story for what it is, a comedy.
Sarah, I want you to...
Sarah, I want you to knock him down. Thanks, Theo.
I'll stay next to you.
That was by no means the intention, but many of this game's cutscenes certainly have that so bad it's good quality. The best scored reviews laid on as much praise as I intend to, as ambitious but inconsistent, frustrating but entertaining, or as a gracious failure. As much as Alone in the Dark deserves to be criticised for its problems, it equally deserves to be lavished with praise for some outstanding ideas and set pieces. On the other side of the equation, it's IGN of all publications speaking sense, where valiant efforts at innovation don't make up for boring combat, frustrating controls, poorly designed levels, and a hackneyed story. As GameSpy concluded, you've seen survival horror done scarier and better elsewhere. The negative reviews outweighed the positive, with a final Metacritic score of 58, which isn't as bad as you'd think when some online have called it one of the worst games ever made. There's obvious hyperbole there, but it's the missed opportunities that stung people the most. Had you placed these mechanics as they are in a game with a concise, non-hokey story, with a character who doesn't want to fight your every input, and they'd be well on their way to a score of 70+. 58 wasn't near enough for Eden Games to claim victory in redefining survival horror, the same way Resi 4 had, even if the 1.2 million copies sold in the first month ensured a healthy profit. In response to these reviews, Atari went on the warpath, trying to, unsuccessfully, strong-arm the reviewers with the threat of litigation, not for a bad score that wouldn't fly, but instead over the date the reviews were released. A few outlets had posted their reports before the game's street release date. That isn't out of the ordinary with the use of review copies, but in response to the poor scores, suddenly Atari began claiming piracy, despite the outlets in question, namely Germany's 4 players, swearing that they were sent legitimate review copies through the regular channels. Game Reactor even pulled its negative review from its site. Gamer.no in Norway claimed that Atari also contacted them after purchasing a copy from a store that broke the street date, which, to be fair to Atari, is fraudulent, but certainly doesn't excuse them from begging the editorials to remove their negative reviews. Atari claimed the reviews couldn't have been released early as they only sent out the review copies a day before the launch date, a practice that Embracer Group continued when sending out copies of the most recent Alone in the Dark. As mentioned in that review, this practice is scummy because it forces journalists to rush their analysis for clicks, deliberately preventing them from providing a well-reasoned and thoroughly informed score, hence my suspicion of the chapter select feature. Digging deeper into this fiasco, Luke Plunkett over at Kotaku claims that the 360 version did release early on BitTorrent, suggesting that the only publication to pull their review, Game Reactor, may indeed have had a pirated copy and was performing damage control. Regardless, they reinstated their review after the game was officially released, and their original score remained. As Plunkett rightly claims, Atari had legitimate reasons to worry that outlets might have accessed unfinished copies, which could lead to a negative opinion, yet it is highly dubious that they were only attacking negative reviews of the only game they were releasing in 2008 that had any chance of making a profit. And looking at this lineup, Plunkett was definitely correct in that assessment. By any means, Atari were trying their best to give Eden Games all the chances it needed to make this a success. The delayed PlayStation 3 version of the game, caused by technical difficulties with the complex cell architecture, allowed them to address the many concerns raised by critics directly, leading to the creation of the definitive version, Alone in the Dark Inferno, released in November later that same year. This is the version you've been watching in this video. To give the game the best chance it could have, I felt it was only fair to play it in the apparently fixed state. Eventually, these changes were to be rolled out onto the PC and Xbox 360 versions via an update, but for whatever reason, that never happened. With a fully controllable 360-degree camera, a zoomed-out third-person perspective, running by default, more responsive movement, inventory management using the D-pad, the removal of batteries for the torch, tighter driving controls, more freeform crafting, weaker enemies, extra checkpoints, and minor narrative changes, any issue highlighted by critics was either modified or entirely removed, for better or for worse. Having played the PC version back-to-back with the PS3 Inferno version, I found the changes noticeable, but not enough to alter the perception of the game dramatically, and critics mostly agreed, as the Metacritic aggregate score is only 11 points higher.
Nice.
While I own the game on Xbox 360, having broken the bank with a frankly outrageous high price of £2, if the Inferno version is what the devs call the definitive release, who am I to argue? There is a charm to the overly bloomed roughness of a 720p signal. It's unequivocally 7th gen. Still, my PC Steam copy has a much better resolution, and whenever that footage is on screen, it'll feel like the optician has fixed your eyesight for the first time. I played the PS3 version via the RPC S3 emulator, so any graphical hiccups can be blamed on that. Performance-wise, it runs as smoothly as butter, provided your butter is locked at 30 FPS. I can report that, based on the 360 version, which I had to record via my phone because my capture card decided to die of old age, that the native performance on the 7th gen was not as good, at times dropping into the low 20s if not lower. Hitting New Game, we awaken in first person on a hospital bed to a room of goons, and are introduced to our first innovative mechanic, blinking. Every 4 seconds our vision will blur, and we will need to manually blink to restore it. At first I was stunned by the time limit. A 4-second interval means constant blinking during any first person sequence. I immediately imagined how frustrating the gunplay was going to be. To play devil's advocate, it would add some additional, if not necessary, challenge, and had the game been played entirely in first person, like the Silent Hill playable trailer, I could see this mechanic being used to up the ante, with the consistent blur and masking upcoming jump scares, especially if each blink had the potential to reveal a new, startling anomaly. Thankfully, the 4-second limit is simulating Edward's dizziness after a procedure. Once given complete control, blinking will not be needed. For a few hours I presumed it only existed to increase the immersion of this introduction to the game's secondary and entirely forgettable villain in Mr. Crowley, plainly nodding to the infamous British occultist Aleister Crowley. The system instead comes back in a way that reinforces the added challenge I theorized. When fighting certain evolved rats, these insect-like fellas, the green bile they spit completely muddies our vision, forcing rapid blinks to clear the screen so we can shoot the bastards. Rats is also spelt with a Z. All the enemies end with a Z. Humans, vampires. It's a choice. I don't know why it was the choice they made, seeing as these aren't zombies, but instead devil-possessed humans. If that pool of enemies sounds small, it's because it is. There are 3 levels of humans, skinny, bulky and evolved, 2 types of rats, and 1 kind of bat. And a floor crack, but that barely counts. The rats are, as their name suggests, warped New York rats transformed to help Lucifer take control of the city. Visually, they look more like bugs, and as mentioned regarding the similarly looking cockroach baddies in AITD 24, they take on the role of the zombie chickens from the original, as well as being head crabs, because it's a post-Half-Life world, so of course, we need more head crabs. After our rude awakening, and in a flurry of quick dialogue, we learn our first name, that an evil entity was unleashed from our body via an exorcism, and the man who performed it knows us and is being led away. What stands out immediately is the absence of subtitles. The preference here is subjective, but what surprised me is that there are none in the game at all. Subtitles are handy for myself as I easily miss quickly spoken sentences during action, which happens a lot in this game, so it's a shame that none are provided. Instead, all foreign language versions are dubbed, and from some brief testing, the dubbing sounds pretty good, so there is that.
Dámela, por favor.
Stumbling out of the room, Crowley tells his cronies to execute us on the roof, and it's not long until all hell lets loose, literally.
My God. Who the hell am I?
Okay, it's time to talk about the writing. It's not good, it's downright terrible. Writing by committee rarely works, especially if the committee is primarily inspired by some of the most angsty television of the early 2000s. What makes this all the more confusing is that Hell's Kitchen native and accomplished author Lorenzo Carcaterra oversaw all script writing and dialogue. Reviews for its works, such as Sleepers, which later received a film adaptation, are generally very positive, praising his ability to write tense, thrilling, and suspenseful novels. Atari approached him to give the characters an authentic New York edge, and he did achieve the vulgarity associated with that.
There must be some mistake. Waking up tonight was a fucking mistake.
It goes to show, however, that a talented writer alone isn't enough. All cogs in the machine need to work well, from initial idea generation to cutscene direction, voice acting direction, animation, and so on. Full credit has to go to James McCaffrey for trying his damnedest to make this work. At times, he pulls it off.
How does it feel to be so alone?
I'm used to it.
And at others, no amount of talent was going to help.
You're in great shape for an old man.
Forgive me for not laughing. My dentures would fall out.
Unintentional hilarity is the best mindset to have when entering this story. No amount of trying to take it seriously will tie together its ridiculous plot points, absurd narrative, and bizarre attempts at cliffhangers or plot twists. Consider the ending of episode 1, which attempts to depict the devil possessing someone as a cliffhanger, which may have worked if the section leading to it wasn't so awkward, with a near 12-second segment of her crying before control is given back to the player. This is the apparent cliffhanger.
Who are you? What have you done to her?
She's one of my hosts now, as you once were.
That one line is it. Boom, straight into the credits. Can you imagine if they released this episodically over Xbox Live and PSN? Expecting someone to sink $5 on episode 2 was a fanciful thought. Poloni told Game Reactor that there were supposed to be coming next video segments, but they aren't in the game, presumably cut content. They wouldn't have rectified this, but it's better than an out-of-place credit scroll. The internet dubs this accidental comedy as NARM, referring to a scene in 6 Feet Under's final season where Nate Fisher complains about his arm being numb, exclaiming "numb arm" slurred into a single syllable.
Numb arm, numb.
Nate! What's the matter?
NARM describes a moment meant to be serious, but due to poor execution, excessive melodrama, overused foul language, or due to the sheer absurdity of the situation, the drama is lost, inadvertently becoming funny. As cringy a term as it is, there is no better definition, especially the evolution of this into NARM charm, essentially taking guilty pleasure in acknowledging that the story is bad, which is what makes it so enduring. I had a great time watching the cutscenes unfold with a stupid grin on my face, waiting for the next ludicrous intense line to crack me up.
You think I'll be safe here?
Don't fuck around or I'll shoot you myself.
Even spontaneous occurrences are sources of accidental humor, like the ragdoll physics on Combi as he flails across the floor after being decked by a monster, or watching him fall to his death, only to receive a phone call upon landing. I would have preferred that Alone in the Dark 2008 be a good game with a good story, but at least what we got is memorable, if not for all the wrong reasons. It's better than being mostly forgettable, like the more recent entry. With the mirror smashed, the camera pans back, revealing the third-person perspective the majority of gameplay takes place in. Switching between third and first person wasn't entirely novel at the time, but it was rare. Even to this day, Resident Evil Requiem markets this feature as revolutionary while being 17 years behind the curve. While we can't play the entire game in first person, a large part of the on-ground gameplay, and especially the open world section later on, can be. You will need to interact with each view mode regardless. For example, you can only aim in first person or throw an object and repel in third person. It's a bespoke system that is imperfect in both modes. Notably, the first person aiming on controller is imprecise. If you've ever played Fallout 3 on console, you will know the feeling. Large dead zones and uncomfortable aim acceleration make minute adjustments nearly impossible. To compensate, there is a generous aim assist mechanic reminiscent of GoldenEye's, where we can see it take control as the underbarrel laser zooms to nearby targets. It works around 80% of the time, and it's in those 20% of instances where you will wish you were playing on PC instead. While that addition omits the vast improvements to the third-person camera in Inferno, first person is a dream. Targeting the tiny sliver of open wounds that constitute the human's weak point is far more viable when we have precise control. That third-person camera, the bane of most reviewers, was barely an issue on the PS3. Barring rare instances where the original fixed perspective is used, the new camera is held above Edward and fully controllable, allowing an overview of our surroundings and making more precise platforming sections work as intended. I tested the original 360 version after completing the game on PS3, and while the fixed perspective camera and quasi-tank controls were outdated for the time, I didn't find them anywhere near as unplayable as some reviews stated. However, I must admit that knowing what to do, thanks to having recently finished the game, helped immensely in understanding where I needed to go. Actually, that's an area where Inferno went too far. In response to complaints that puzzles were too obtuse, the addition of sweeping camera angles visualizing a new area aimed to solve this. These are more reminiscent of the PlayStation 1's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a children's game, than an 18+ rated survival horror. The original problem wasn't that puzzles were too challenging anyway, but that the old camera made identifying platformable edges or item locations ambiguous. The fixed perspectives directly pay homage to the 1992 original that introduced that concept to 3D gaming in the first place. When they aren't used on the 360, the camera changes to an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter perspective, except there is no third-person shooting. Stylistically, I prefer this angle's look compared to the PS3's more traditional choice. Still, I understand how it would make traversing the game world even less precise than it already is with the sluggish controls. Edward appears to be stuck in honey, which isn't an issue when walking around a puzzle section, but when we need to frantically run during combat or an escape sequence, it can feel as if we're fighting the floor as much as any of the monsters. Inferno rectified this mainly by allowing Edward to turn on a dime and default to running instead of walking. Eden Games' original decision is more logical from an immersion standpoint, and it worked well for Resident Evil just 3 years prior, but Resident Evil wasn't asking Leon to do this. Inferno's new camera and control scheme make a better game, if not a less stylistic one. Graphically, it's surprisingly strong. Edward's model is well defined, with the deep pores that proved we were living in the future. Nothing says HD like your hand looking like the surface of the moon. Shadows are remarkably high resolution. To this day, shadows are often shimmery messes, whereas AITD 08 provided us with crisp outlines. The quality isn't consistent, for instance other facial models are not up to the same level, however for the most part the game was pushing the tech as much as any other blockbuster from that time, and the frame rate on the 360 proves that it was pushing it a bit too much. The sound design, however, is hit and miss. Proving again that they were ahead of the curve, the credits emphasize a reliance on outsourcing, which wasn't too common in game development in the late 2000s, not as much as it is now anyway. The team that benefited the most from outside help was the sound mixers, who had an internal team that was already surprisingly large. Where the efforts went though is unclear. On all versions of the game there are missing sound effects. The mix is awful as well, with effects that play far too quietly, and there are no menu settings to adjust this. During a climactic driving sequence on 59th Street, which was used in every trailer, specific effects again do not have the impact one would expect. It's one of those aspects that you overlook until it's not there, but when it's poorly done, an inadequate sound mix can't help but pull you out of the game, the last thing Eden Games would want with their focus on immersion. Interestingly, the mix was less of an issue on the surround sound system I was using with my 360, so I'm going to assume the game was exclusively mixed in Dolby Digital 5.1 surround, and that they didn't consider a separate stereo mix. If that was the case, it would be a worrying oversight. The saving grace here is the soundtrack. Written by later award-winning composer Olivier de Rivière, he was one of the few on the team with actual experience within the survival horror genre, having composed for Hydravision's obscure duology. It was Alone in the Dark's departure from this genre that excited him to the project. As Nadal informed de Rivière, they were seeking an orchestral score with an epic scale in mind. Ironically, Hydravision Entertainment was drafted to develop the PS2 remake of the game, which I won't be covering in this specific retrospective, but do intend to review live during a stream in the future. Compared to the series' origins, the music can be best described as overly grandiose, but that fits the material it's tied with perfectly. The powerful choral melody drives the theme and is a primary reason some of the game's more climactic moments work as well as they do, even when the writing or controls are trying their hardest to work against it. It's no wonder that Atari identified the potential here and published the soundtrack as a standalone album. While it's great for acknowledging de Rivier's excellent work, it does mean I have to be cautious with its use in this video, as it falls under YouTube's copyright detection systems, unlike games that do not have their music published separately. As an action title, combat is a key part of gameplay. Don't expect to be avoiding foes using stealth or running away. Edward has been a certified badass since his transformation in Alone in the Dark 2, which blasphemously removed the character's iconic mustache. That badassery continues here as we find a gun on a recently deceased cop, and get to work clearing the city of vermin. Broken into 3 styles, combat is performed via melee, ranged, or throwables. Melee is the most innovative, taking the free-flow control of Mountain Blade or the early Elder Scrolls entries and adding true 360-degree movement, awkwardly tied to the analog stick. Any object that can be picked up, from a chair to a baseball bat, may be wielded in this manner. By holding the weapon back in the opposite direction we intend to swing, the attack is charged, and quickly moving the stick across performs the action. This applies to all uses of the arms. If you need to bash down a door with a fire extinguisher, pull it back and push it forward to achieve that. Using a mouse on PC is less clumsy, but only because the devs were gracious enough to implement a dedicated swing button. It's not that the system doesn't work, but that the lack of feedback creates an ungainly, loose experience. Modern haptic feedback, like on the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, could have helped rectify this. As it is, melee is unsatisfying and floaty, used as a last resort rather than a preferred method. By design, this makes melee against a horde of enemies impossible. With no means to target specific enemies, dodge or easily run away, taking on tens of foes at once with just a stick is deliberately futile. All enemies have the same weakness: fire. Burning knocked out humans with an environmental object placed in a bonfire is the main reason to use the melee system. Without being burnt, they will eventually stand back up, so we'll want to ensure we don't waste the limited flammable objects denoted by the fire icon next to the overly large UI elements. That's where the gun comes in. As we're given it from the offset, and bullets are the least scarce resource in the game, there is little reason to avoid this holy grail. A few well-placed bullets will knock out most enemies, allowing our homemade cremation service to take place. And if we find some flammable liquid, we can create fire bullets that eliminate the need to burn enemies with our wavy arms. In real life, this would result in the gun promptly blowing our hand off, but I'm not complaining. The less I need to wiggle this analog stick, the better. The throwables are homemade grenades, created by finding a random bottle filled with nitrous glycerin. Why so many of these explosive bottles are littered around isn't clear, but even without them, a bottle of vodka usually gets the job done just as well. Throwing a bottle triggers a slow-mo sequence in which Edward can blast it out of the air, creating a fiery bubble that consumes everything around it. These handcrafted airburst missiles are the home-run, one-and-done approach to all enemies. As they're all allergic to fire, showering them in superheated rain is an easy win. Finding bottles isn't hard, and even without them, there's always the flamethrower. I love this one. It's a risky play as you have to get closer due to the limited range, as well as the first-person perspective limiting how many enemies can be seen, especially with the low POV of around 70, which cannot be changed, though that's not unusual for the era. Any spray can be combined with a lighter to ignite monsters in seconds. It may seem overpowered, but the balance comes from the pathetically small amount of spray remaining in each can, with most of them found discarded in bins. Of course, survival horror is meant to be about limited resources. The sole time they are limited is in an open world section near the end of the game, and still, all enemies can be defeated using melee and a lighter if need be. I'm not against this. Melee was a fallback in the original as well, and at least requiring all enemies to be burned adds an extra layer of complexity. I just wish the challenge of scarcity received more focus. At one point, I had hundreds of rounds of ammo and an ample supply of flammable liquid to make burning bullets, all but removing any remaining difficulty, and it wasn't like I was going out of my way to hoard items either. The inventory system tries to reach an equilibrium. Diegetically implemented via the inside of Edward's biker jacket, we can only hold on to a limited number of items, with more and more slots filling with essential plot devices over time, like the gun, torch, lighter, and later a MacGuffin needed to solve some puzzles. What remains are slots for bullets, sticky tape, and a terrible flip knife on the left-hand side, and the bottles and spray cans on the right. Before Inferno, torch batteries also stole a slot, and they were next to essential as the torch would burn through a full battery in a few minutes flat. A permanently charged torch is granted to PS3 players instead. This change was for the best. The torch is only essential during a small number of segments, so hoarded batteries just for those occasions was more of an annoyance than an additional layer of inventory strategy. There was some success here. By sharing the 5 slots on the right side between spray cans, flammable bottles, and healing items, decisions have to be made not based on how scarce objects are, but on what you think you may need next, especially as healing comes in 2 forms. Minor injuries are healed with a spray anesthetic, diegetically applied in first person. 5 months before Far Cry 2 used a similar technique. In contrast, major wounds start a bleed-out timer and must be bandaged. The bandages themselves take an additional slot on the left side. A cautious player will find themselves carrying both bandages and healing spray, limiting their crafting and combat capabilities. Going in the opposite direction will leave us vulnerable should we develop a major wound or find ourselves with low health following an intense battle. Health itself is displayed as wounds across Edward's body. In another example of an admirable idea with poor execution, their textures placed atop his jacket model, appearing more akin to slices of ham slipping off his clothes than deep cuts slicing open his overalls. Again though, they beat another game to market in X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is the only other game of note that uses a similar, if not much better implemented and dramatic system. AITD 08's lack of permanent UI elements, such as a health bar, is significant, attempting to maintain a cinematic direction while emulating its predecessor. The benefits are undermined by the aforementioned UI pop-ups, which are both garish and oversized. Not everyone had moved to high-definition displays by 2008, so the size is likely a requirement, along with the decision to use icons, which reduces translation issues. Unfortunately, they undermine the immersive qualities Eden Games aimed for, as an icon blocks a screen every few seconds. It's worse during driving sequences where tutorial pop-ups clog the top of the screen, obscuring the view ahead. And there are so many tutorials on top of tutorials, all necessary due to the sheer degree of varying control schemes. When you get a PDA around a third of the way into the game, you even receive a text message from a doctor who goes over a tutorial the game already taught over an hour ago. Another consequence of the episodic nature. With Eden Games' relentless pursuit of high pace, their primary method of ensuring the player is never bored is with regular gameplay switch-ups. From a cutscene into rappelling, into platforming, then a puzzle sequence, some firefighting, a smattering of combat, a minigame, a frantic driving sequence, and finally another cutscene to tie it all up. Each episode will usually include these systems at some point. The manual is best used to explain the issue. Just look at all these pages. Each system has its own control scheme, and they don't relate to each other. For example, the jump button in standard gameplay is square, and you can grab a rope by jumping onto it, but you cannot jump off the rope using square, instead with X. Because these systems are cycled through so often and never overstay their welcome, we aren't given much time to learn the various controls, forcing the game to reuse tutorials. Not that all the gameplay types are that difficult, many are just for the spectacle. Firefighting and climbing fall under that umbrella. As Poloni advertised, in some instances fire is unscripted and left to spread organically in a tile-based format based on a heat percentage. When a tile of ground is alight, the surrounding tiles will get hotter until a threshold is passed and the fire spreads. Putting out fire is done via a fire extinguisher, or if you're daring, with water bottles dispensed from vending machines, although the reason to do that would be personal choice. Whenever linear gameplay requires extinguishing flames, the tool for the job will always be nearby. There isn't much to say here. The fire tech was impressive for the time, again beating Far Cry 2 to market, which similarly advertised such technology. Still, this isn't exactly a reason to pick up the game. What was sold as a reason is the visual spectacle. The heavily scripted 59th Street collapsing building is now infamous for being over the top. And I'd go so far as to say that if you showed the average gamer from 2010 this clip, they would have seen it before, even if they couldn't identify from where. Eye candy is all it is though. There's only one path, with no need for strategic thinking, just basic timing and the bare minimum of attention. Nevertheless, long before Uncharted grew gratuitous with its exaggerated climbing set pieces, AITD was giving them a run for their money. I found more satisfaction in traversing the great chasm surrounding Central Park, where we have to pass through a crashed car, using the seemingly unnecessary ability to slide between all four seats. Utilizing mechanics added for one reason, in this case realism, for another is always refreshing. A single sequence near the end of the game does add those bile-spitting rats, while another requires the dodging of fallen debris. Both additions help break the monotony of climbing, yet I was never excited to engage with it. The same with rappelling, ostensibly the same system but in reverse. It does however get credit for introducing the first physics-based puzzle in episode 1, featuring a live wire blocking our path. With a prime example of havoc physics at play and a low poly cable, we can push it out of the way and over a barrier with our body, de-electrifying the wall below. A staple of the genre since that first installment, puzzle solving is the cornerstone of survival horror, providing a purpose for why the playable character would risk their life entering such dangerous areas in the first place. Thankfully, they've come a long way since the find a specific item and use it on a specific object mechanic of AITD 92. AITD 08 allows a surprising amount of creativity in using the environmental objects and craftable items we can carry. Quite often, puzzles will have multiple solutions, even if they aren't dramatically varied. When confronted with a hive of rat nests protected behind crumbling walls, we can destroy them by flooding the area with alcohol from a nearby cafe and lighting it, or by creating bombs. Sticking an emergency flare to a flammable bottle using tape is one option, and another is the classic Molotov cocktail, which involves stuffing a dishcloth in some vodka. Later in that same episode, a hungry rat will move on a loop between its nest and a pool of blood for feeding. Destroying the nest may be accomplished by mixing alcohol into the blood and lighting the resulting trail, or with a well-timed sticky bomb. The puzzles aren't just fire-based either, although unsurprisingly, given the branding, back of the box and tech demos, many of them are. A few are seemingly inspired by Portal, using the manipulation of light beams or security lasers to control doorways and moving podiums. Minigames are interjected for further gameplay diversity, which really wasn't needed by this point. The one I'm fine with narratively is the hot wiring. Logically, not every car we stumble across is going to have the keys hidden in the sun visor or left in the ignition. Controls again try to be innovative here for the sake of it. Why use buttons to control when a cable is held when they can be changed via the analog sticks, one for each hand? It makes complete sense once learnt, yet it's another obtuse control scheme to chuck on the pile. The best minigame, however, is interactive CPR. The marketing was right, this is the most interactive gaming environment of all time. Even lungs are interactive. We should be thankful that Eden Games didn't have time to implement the PS3's 6-axis support. Can you imagine how wild they would have gone with motion controls as an option? The physics-based puzzles are some of the more interesting, such as the aforementioned electrified cables, which need to be moved out of the way using the awkward wavy arms. There's a teetering bus that requires the forming of a counterbalance with the bodies found within, and there's the bashing of doors. Even the ability to shoot open a door by blasting away its lock comes with great satisfaction. I'm sure we can all agree that there are many games where we wish this were possible. Homage is paid to the Dark Maze near AITD 92's conclusion with this black goo. Afraid of the light, Edward can use flares, glow sticks, flammable furniture, or a torch to create a safe path. In what can describe much of the game though, when this works, there is no reason to complain, but that's the thing, whether it works or not is a crapshoot. For seemingly no reason, the black goo will ignore its fear of light just to mess with us, especially if we commit the cardinal sin of holding the torch at slightly the wrong angle. There's even an entire forklift section, which has an air of being the remnants of an older tech demo left in the game because the devs figured there was no reason not to. This section helps demonstrate that Half-Life 2 succeeded not only because it introduced new technology, but also because it was a good game that effectively showcased it. AITD has all the impressive tech and physics puzzles you could want, but if they're implemented in a bad game, it means nothing. Not to mention that if you take too long on a puzzle, the game will straight up tell you what to do. Another area where the game is ahead of its time in every way, even the negative ones. And I thought it was bad when the pop-up helped me with a puzzle. In a later episode, an NPC started offering tips even as I executed the correct solution.
Grab those electric cables and try to fry their ass.
It felt like I was experiencing the backlash towards God of War Ragnarok 16 years early. In what feels like a nod towards how obscure some puzzles were in the original trilogy, and indeed within the competition, some puzzles are deliberately designed to appear more complex than they are. This circular antechamber has cryptic symbols placed on each pillar, all corresponding with a riddle. Where the flames bend, the path extends. My initial thought process led me to try to identify the correct symbol, to knock a hole through that wall, only for the true answer to be literal. There is a bend in this cave wall, and that's the weak point. If anything, it's a good example of a riddle that throws you off its scent by how much simpler it really is. The most exciting puzzles, however, are the boss fights. In this instance, Eden Games identified that their combat system wasn't strong enough to carry a full-scale Shadow of the Colossus style boss fight on its own, such as this runaway train chase where we find ourselves sprinting down the carriages in a hectic search for bottles and throwing them when there's a chance to make an opening to run for it. Both exhilarating and satisfyingly demanding, if not impaired by the controls. Although if the player was able to reach this part at the end of episode 6, they're likely over the learning curve hurdle already. This isn't the type of gameplay we expect to see from what was otherwise a relatively grounded series, ludicrous in comparison even, but still entertaining. The boss designs make little sense, looking more like something out of Alien than anything Lovecraftian or in the vein of AITD, and there's no effort to explain these significant mutations. Then again, explanations aren't the game's strong point nor necessary. This whole train boss fight was cut content ironically, as it wasn't in the 360 or PC versions. Seeing as it was one of the most memorable encounters, I'm glad the decision was made to add it back in, especially since episode 6 would otherwise be only around 20 minutes long, by far the shortest in the game. As Eden Games had the later missed potential to enter driving game royalty as the current proprietors of the Test Drive series, they couldn't help but bring some of that racing expertise into their action epic. Somehow, however, they inadvertently developed some of the greasiest driving physics I've experienced. If anything is to blame, it has to be the New York Taxi, surely. Grand Theft Auto 4, released just 2 months prior, similarly basked in its soft-riding, hazardous cars. Given how controllable and comprehensive TDU was in comparison, and given that the Twilight 2 engine was shared between both games, these drift-happy, underpowered vehicles must have been purposefully implemented. They aren't impossible to control. With the correct application of brakes and throttle feathering, getting around an exploding city can be done, but not without teething problems. Mostly from loss of speed. Any minor collision or an incline gradient above 1% will slow the car from 60 miles per hour to something closer to walking pace. If that doesn't result in immediate death, it will trigger hilarious ludonarrative dissonance as we warp into a farcical cutscene. With time segments, such as escaping from a horde of vampires or a literal timer on screen, the chance of clipping a tree only for the car to flip or lose momentum guarantees failure. This is what I naively believed the chapter select was originally for, not skipping these strenuous segments, but resetting to a checkpoint at will, in a pseudo-early integration of the rewind mechanic seen in racing games of the following decade. This does work, except when the chapter select is placed before a cutscene, which it usually is, we're forced to watch it again with no way to skip it. Car models themselves also have surprisingly complex damage models, where the doors can fall out and even the roof can completely shear off, which was more common on the 360 than the Inferno version, a change that was probably made because when the car is too destroyed, it's clear to see when certain NPCs that should be in the vehicle during a cutscene aren't. Driving was even harder to control on the 360 original before they tightened the controls for Inferno, although I can't say the difference was hugely noticeable, even when played back to back. What made the non-updated driving worse is the bailout system. Flicking the left analog stick or mashing the left movement key while driving causes Combi to throw himself out of the vehicle, no matter how fast you're going. If you're too forceful with the controls, it's extremely easy to trigger just by driving around naturally, and it becomes downright unbearable during the frenzied set pieces, where dodging upcoming traffic as it beelines for our car is a necessity. Thankfully, bailouts are tied to the same button as getting out of the car normally in Inferno, which is the usual way to approach that control scheme. Bugs also still run rampant in this seemingly fixed version, like the car bouncing off an invisible barrier, or deaths occurring because the game said it should. A piece of this roof was meant to fall on the vehicle, but we were fast enough to escape, only for the game to decide we died anyway. Driving isn't just here to facilitate Dukes of Hazzard style jumping scenes, although that does happen not twice but 3 times. It's for the large open world of Central Park. We first experienced this as a chaperoned, restricted prelude in Episode 3, offering only a taste of the wider open world gameplay to come, only it won't come until midway through Episode 7, near the end of the game. Given that a high pace is the goal, this decision is baffling. It all but halts the game to a crawl. Just as the story is hitting its penultimate climax, we're told we need to clear areas of the map to gather an arbitrary amount of devil power before we may progress. Worse still, this doesn't happen just once, but twice, separated by a single story beat. Presumably, an open world was planned from the beginning, which explains the emphasis on various vehicle-based mechanics, like lootable glove boxes and a fuel tank that can be penetrated to create a car bomb, 2 features that are never used in the linear segments. Cars even contain different loots depending on their outward appearance, like police cars holding ammo or taxis having spray cans. Yet when it came to tying said open world into the scripted, cinematic-focused linear sections, Eden Games was unsure how to do so. Had it been drip-fed every episode, or perhaps served as a permanent free roam area that existed as a sandbox in between episodes, similar but not identical to Grand Theft Auto, it may have just worked. Strangely, this open world section too is ahead of its time. Ostensibly it exists because it was the trend of that period, and still is. With the added power of the 7th gen, suddenly every title was looking to tack on an open world just because they could. But AITD 08's implementation is closer to a proto-survival sim akin to DayZ, running around with barely anything to use, trying to find the items required to accomplish our goal. However, a large open world doesn't fit this game. It makes little narrative sense, and to add insult to injury, the only reason to complete all available side activities is to earn an Xbox achievement or PlayStation trophy. It feels as if it exists because it can, or because corporate requested it based on some think tank results. These side activities are only required in a limited capacity due to Combi's new special ability, Spectral Vision. A pendant worn around his neck is able to absorb the power of Lucifer himself, which is currently contained within the organic roots sprouting around the park. Every time a root is destroyed, with the use of fire of course, the stronger the Spectral Vision gets. Unlocked over 3 tiers, Edward becomes adept at revealing enemy weak points, which are the already glaring open wounds, and then seeing some arbitrary puzzle elements. It's these glowing hieroglyphics that are to blame for this. Until we reach 25 Spectral Vision, we will not be able to see them, soft locking the game until this number has been collected. Later in episode 8, it will be a magical barrier that requires 40 Spectral Vision to bypass. With each route earning a pitiful 3 vision points, this isn't a quick task. Thankfully, these are the reduced amounts, as the number was even higher before Inferno. Reading old forums online, it's apparent that this requirement was enough to dissuade players from continuing any further, all thanks to what can be characterized as padding. Every complaint can be linked to Nadal and Sliwa's overly ambitious attempt to create a new genre. Survival action doesn't work in this implementation, nor does turning a historically horror-based series into one with a horror theme. Alone in the Dark 92 is unquestionably a horror game. Within a minute of loading, it starts delivering jump scares and genre references. From the sound effects to the music, the atmosphere is firmly rooted in horror. The game strives to keep the player alert, never allowing them to feel safe.
In an adventure game, you walk 80% of the time. If you want to put big pressure on the player, just scare him on what he does all the time. Just walking. Open a door, you have a monster just behind, so no, you'll be afraid for opening every door. It was the same thing for the first corridor. The soul cracked under your feet and you just die like this. Now you are afraid of walking.
In Alone in the Dark 08, the only moment I felt that was briefly in the opening secluded hallway, only for Combi's overacting to shatter the tension. From that point on, it was obvious what this game is, an action title with a horror theme. It's as much a horror game as Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. In fact, that game does a better job of emulating a horror experience. AITD 08 includes survival elements, even the flawed controls of early survival horror, but I was never remotely anxious. The original Alone in the Dark and the games it inspired focus on isolation within haunted, claustrophobic, enclosed spaces, far from the vast crowds of humanity. The choice of New York Central Park was deliberately made to be the complete opposite. The decision wasn't driven by considerations of how best to scare the player, as Frédérick Raynal once did, but instead by a desire to be different. Central Park appealed to the team because of the challenge of transforming a beautiful tranquil spot into a hellscape, not to invoke fear, but as an exercise.
We chose it because it was a real setting, and the drama that you'll be living with the game will make it even more disturbing because it's not in an imaginary area, but an area in which you know and you can relate to.
Even the enemy placement is blatant, ruining any tension that might have existed. For example, this narrow hallway fight against 2 heavies could have been challenging, as it made the airburst vodka bottle strategy too risky. However, the numerous 2-handed weapons scattered on the floor and the conveniently placed bonfire less than 5 meters from their spawn point ensured that any potential jump scare failed. There's no reason to expect jump scares or fear in AITD 08. That wasn't the aim, and it's not hinted at. It's not as if it's impossible to have both high-octane action and genuine horror. Fear has proven the blueprint is there. The 10-minute long making of video included with the limited edition is a spit in the face of those who forked out the extra cash. Not only is it short, but there is more relevant material in the free studio tour they gave Game Reactor than this fluff piece that serves as marketing for a product that has already been purchased. Nonetheless, there are 3 insights into how the game's story ended up the way it did. First is how each episode and story beat was formed. An aforementioned committee of designers locking themselves in a meeting room and adding whatever interesting ideas came to them. Across a period of 6 months, these were diluted into what entered the final game. The team was then split, with one side focusing on narrative and the other on gameplay. Both collaborated on how best to implement each side. Only then, when Eden Games were happy with the episodic structure and had passed out the cutscenes in a rough format, did they consult with Carcaterra to solidify character personalities and dialogue. Watching this brief interview, he's quick to reel off his experience with television, having written for Law & Order, as well as explaining why he thinks he was chosen for the game, due to his upbringing across the street from Central Park, and the fact that the Atari executive who initially contacted him had enjoyed one of his books.
I guess I brought what they wanted me to bring, and I hope I brought it, was dialogue. They wanted a real New York feel. I've grown up here and I kind of know the city. So I think that's what they were looking for.
Perhaps he's camera shy, but there is a sense that even after completing his commission, he still wasn't sure why they came to him, nor is he fully convinced the final result is satisfactory. To defend the man, he likely wasn't used to working with pre-planned story beats, and with more creative input and control, the final result could have been stronger. Notably though, Carcaterra, as with Eden Games themselves, had no experience with the horror genre. His expertise in gritty, tough, dark cop novels doesn't carry over. Perhaps the link Eden Games made was that Edward is a paranormal investigator who literally began the series as a private investigator. Had there been more of that investigative direction, similar to how PC's Interactive approached the character, Carcaterra's prowess would have had time to shine. What he was given to work with was a completely blank slate, devoid of a character arc, a forced love interest, and the only character who actually fit the investigator archetype being killed off at the end of episode 2.
What I think I did is try to give the secondary characters as much of dialogue muscle as they could, and as many of their moments as I could allow them.
Unfortunately for Carcaterra, when a character's premature death is forced upon you, there's really not a lot that can be done. Perhaps that's why these cutscenes have that frantic, rushed feeling I described. Carcaterra was trying his best to offer as much information as possible within the confined timeframe Eden Games' story beats gave him. The narrative rides on and fails because of Combi. Plot-convenient amnesia works to introduce the player to this world, but Edward needed to actually become himself around midway through the game for the sake of the story. He begins with no idea of who he is, and by the end, despite knowing his name and history, he still isn't Edward, just a confused husk with even less of an idea of what is going on. Because his memories never return, his history as a paranormal investigator is pointless, and his ability to achieve what he does is pinned on prophecy and the help of those around him, rather than his own capabilities.
Edward was, he's Brad Pitt, he's the star. So you can't mess with the star.
And that's the problem. Eden Games had already butchered the star long before Carcaterra could infuse any personality. A man out of time approach would have been stronger, and the background for the story was already primed to facilitate it. In the late 1930s, sometime around the events of Alone in the Dark 3, Combi discovered the Philosopher's Stone. Unbeknownst to him, the stone is not just the key to immortal life as the ancient order of alchemists claim it to be, but also a vessel for Lucifer. Whoever wears the stone contains within them the weakened powers of the devil. Akin to Diablo's Dark Wanderer, Edward uses his knowledge and mental strength to contain the entity for decades, seeking places of refuge and religion such as remote monasteries to remove himself from society and perhaps gain further knowledge on how to contain the demon, told through PDA entries which take the place of the many lore books in this modern interpretation. We learn of the times throughout history when Edward was unable to contain Lucifer, killing those who surround him as he set off anew to wander the earth alone. The skills and knowledge he learned over this time account for his competency in combat. As he explains, while his memories are gone, his physical capabilities feel more primal, allowing him to accomplish feats beyond his understanding.
Nice work. How'd you do this?
Not sure. It's like some sort of buried instinct. It's primal.
Something connected to your amnesia?
It's not just that. Maybe Crowley's right. There's something inside me, something dark and violent. I know I've done fucked up things in the past. I can feel it.
When we take control of Edward, it is after an exorcism is performed, forcing Lucifer out of the stone Combi wore. The devil takes on the form of a crack from hell and swarms the surrounding city. The procedure destroys Combi's memory, but what if it removed the memories from his time of possession instead, where he awakes believing it is still the 1930s? He would keep his investigative abilities and knowledge of the dark arcane world and be primed to try to contain this new threat immediately, rather than doing so because the plot told him to. With absolutely no memory of his past afterlife, surely running away would make more sense. Had he awoken as the paranormal investigator we love from the original, his actions are far more logical. The explanation Eden Games used instead is again based on his enigmatic primal instincts, which help him solve mysteries and save the world. Being a paranormal investigator has become his nature. It's like a sad commentary on how he wage-slaved as a PI so long it became a carnal need.
To survive, an Edward Comby needs food, water, shelter, and a well-fretted in plot to fraught.
It's that period of time when Edward wandered the earth as he fought Lucifer's domination that explains the name's repurpose. A common but lazy slam dunk I've seen other retrospectives use is that you aren't alone and it's not dark. Haha, very creative. Not only was that not the case in the originals anyway, but it's like saying that Resident Evil doesn't make sense because every game doesn't take place in the residence of Mr. Evil. Alone in the Dark doesn't have to be literal, and I can't believe I'm defending this game here, but I appreciate this interpretation of the name. It has more thought put into it than the rest of the narrative. Edward doesn't know what happened over the last 70 years. He is metaphorically in the dark, and he's alone because he was forced to be. Every time he sought out others, they all died, hence his response in the so-called good ending.
How does it feel to be so alone?
I'm used to it.
The episode in which Comby becomes romantically entwined is literally called Not Alone Anymore. It couldn't be any more on the nose. Admittedly, not all of this is made clear unless you read every PDA entry and join the dots, as well as having to accept that Edward suddenly regained all of his memories in the 1 minute that leads to this ending. Oh, and the fact that he's despairing over losing someone whom he literally met a few days ago. I mean, 70 years is a long time to go without companionship. Maybe the dude was just that desperate. It doesn't explain why she was all for it though.
I feel what you feel.
What? You met him yesterday? I've mentioned the absurd plot points up to this point, and if you're so fortunate as to be unaware of AITD 08's story, I'm going to give a brief overview of each episode. Note that I will be avoiding as much embellishment as possible. What you hear is what is presented in the game chronologically. Episode 1. Edward Comby awakes from an exorcism performed by occultists led by Mr. Crowley, who seeks to unleash Lucifer for reasons. To aid them in said exorcism, they force the help of one Theophile Paddington, once a student of Edward Comby in the 1930s before the latter's disappearance. Comby discovers he has no idea who he is.
Who the hell am I?
During his escape, Comby meets art dealer Sarah Flores, who, despite an impending apocalypse, finds it poignant to introduce herself by her profession.
I'm Sarah Flores, I'm an art dealer.
The two immediately begin flirting, suggesting some physical attraction. Not that this is an appropriate time.
Don't try to take advantage of the situation.
Don't flatter yourself.
A demon attempts to entice Comby with promises of information about his past.
So many questions.
He couldn't care less.
Then I suppose you're the answer man, shithead?
Episode 2. The duo find Theophile left for dead in the underground car park. Paddington explains that he was an apprentice and old friend of Comby, and that Crowley is looking for the Philosopher's Stone, which Paddington had discreetly removed from Comby's body during the exorcism. Escaping by car, the gang races against supernatural fissures opening within the Earth's crust, until they crash within the outskirts of Central Park. The green space has found itself cut off from the surrounding area, and strangely in much better shape than the rest of Manhattan. As Poloni explained to Game Reactor, the question the player should ask is,
why is there such a huge park in such a crowded city as New York?
Not that the game has given us any reason to ask this. Hurt from the crash, and acknowledging that his advanced age will only slow the gang, Paddington gives Comby the stone, cryptically tells him to find him in room 943 of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and promptly dies. Episode 3. Comby is injured from the crash, so Sarah runs off to grab the attention of the Soul ambulance serving the survivors in Central Park.
Hey! Over here! Help! Hey!
Comby grabs Paddington's PDA and proceeds to search for medical supplies. A horde of vampires chases Comby into a public toilet, where he finds treatment in a piece of gauze. With his exit blocked, Comby takes an alternative route as he scales the chasm back into the park. Entering a sewer, Crowley torments Comby with his past via Paddington's phone.
How's the memory, Mr. Carnby? Still lost in Wonderland?
Carnby.
Sarah, aboard the ambulance, finds Combi. The attendant medic pulls up Edward's extremely outdated medical information, showing that he's
100 years old.
At some point, he gained the eye scar as an identifiable marker, and based on how the other possessed demons appear, it's likely a healed result of Lucifer's sway over him in the past. Episode 4. Sarah and Edward rush to the Met Museum to discover what Theo meant about Room 943. Combi explains his primal urge to destroy the tendril roots that Lucifer, often dubbed the Lightbringer in-game, is using to possess the people in the park. On the way to the museum, the vampires return, chasing the duo through the park in a car chase, eventually grabbing Sarah. Combi enters the museum alone, solving various puzzles and battling monsters along the way, before finding Sarah trapped within an oozing organic vampire's nest. Episode 5. Edward frees Sarah, gives her the kiss of life, and then receives a kiss of love. The two work their way through the museum, deep into the basement, in their search for Room 943. They're split up and Combi battles a mega demon. The demon tries to guilt Combi for the murders he committed over the last 70 years, which he is only vaguely aware of from PDA diary entries.
It matters not that you're unable to recall your sins. For you, there will be no mercy.
Unsurprisingly, the amnesiac isn't exactly racked with guilt over memories he does not possess.
That's my problem. Now let's see how you beg for mercy.
The lovebirds reconvene, and after mutilating a deceased guard, they discover the room. Episode 6. Room 943 was Theophile's office during his tenure at the museum. Inexplicably, Paddington discovers the ability to return from the dead, and haunts the couple with a Gmod-style T-pose to assert dominance. With the help of the ethereal discount Dr. Wallace Breen, Combi discovers that the Philosopher's Stone was a trick created by Lucifer to turn its finder into a vessel for the devil's soul. Paddington has spent his entire life researching the stone and discovered that the alchemists who claimed to create it belonged to an ancient cult that followed the Lightbringer. This cult infiltrated the wealthiest classes of society over a millennia, at one point calling themselves the Templars. Yes, this does sound a lot like Assassin's Creed. The French game developer Multiverse deepens. After the discovery of the Americas, the Templars built a secret temple deep underground and protected the land above. This became Central Park, and is why construction on the land is heavily restricted.
I'll stay next to you.
Theo tells Edward that he must exhume the evil roots to learn more in a very on-the-nose video gamey fashion.
Central Park hides secrets you shall exhume. Some are lethal, but one of them can save us. Now wake up.
The duo then use Edward's demonic ability to discover an incomprehensible chamber connected to Room 943 and discover a riddle.
The hands of Venus will shape the lock to this door, while Mars will fight to bring the key back to the core.
Paddington left behind a memory card containing the next clue, theorizing that Belvedere Castle may be linked to the temple that the alchemists built. Sarah stays behind to study Theo's notes, while Edward ventures into a tunnel opening revealed via the spectral vision and a MacGuffin lens Paddington built based on his research. Forklift calamity ensues, as does a runaway train fight. It isn't explained why Edward didn't just leave the museum another way. If you think we may have discovered something in that forklift tunnel, then you'd be wrong. All the new info came from phone calls and PDA info dumps. Arriving at the surface, Crowley discovers Edward from a helicopter and promises to divulge more information about the Lightbringer's prophecy in exchange for the stone. Just as the exchange is about to happen, a massive vampire attacks and the chopper crashes, with both passengers surviving. Combi's plot armor is insane. The number of death-defying stunts and crashes he survives is off the charts. It's like an 8-season long worth of main character plot armor condensed into one short series. Episode 7. Sarah periodically sends more of Theo's notes as Combi clears the park of Lucifer's influence to gain stronger spectral vision. As Tier 2 of the vision is unlocked, Combi can find the alchemist symbols over the castle. Using the lens to unlock a viewing platform, the temple's entrance is revealed by the moon's light and a telescope. Episode 8. Yet more roots need to be destroyed before Tier 3 of the Vision allows Edward to destroy the only Lovecraftian design in the game, a tree that guards the entrance with eyes all over and gnashing worm-like mouths at the end of each branch. Passing through 8 light-based trials to honor the Lightbringer, Combi proves himself to fulfill the prophecy as Lucifer's vessel and unlocks the mysterious key the riddle mentioned, Hermes Trismegistus, seemingly inspired by the ancient Greek legend of the same name, the thrice greatest, the one that inspired Hermeticism, and by weird association, the phrase hermetically sealed. It's another case of Eden Games slotting a well-known name onto a character with vague similarities, like Mr. Crowley. Hermes was the original wielder of the stone, revealing that Lucifer placed his soul within the artifact when he was cast down from heaven. Under its influence, Hermes led the alchemists in building the temple beneath the park, then defied his master and split the stone, casting one half away and keeping the other to ensure his own immortality. Combi was the one who discovered the second half. It isn't explained how Combi found the second half, nor how Hermes broke free of Lucifer's grasp. Unbeknownst to the Lightbringer, it was Hermes who built the sealed chamber in room 943. Only Hermes can unlock the chamber and reveal what it contains.
What kind of artifact is this?
Who's there, Edward?
There's a soul inside.
This is Hermes, Sarah. He's the key. Don't ask me why.
No kidding.
While returning Hermes to the museum, Crowley finds and captures Sarah. Crowley tries in vain to use Sarah's life to threaten Combi for the stone.
You're really starting to piss me off, Crowley.
But cool guys don't miss. Hermes unlocks the antechamber to uncover the link between the afterlife and Earth, which was just always here, I guess. Edward and Hermes combine their stones to open the gate so that they can finally destroy Lucifer, but Combi is immediately repossessed when both halves are joined. Sarah grabs a stone and risks becoming Lucifer instead.
Choose quickly, carrier. Kill her or let her live. You alone can decide, and you will decide for all.
Finally, we have a choice. Does Combi walk away alive or become the
fucking universe
himself? The good ending fulfills the Venus and Mars prophecy, where Lucifer's greatest defeat comes at the height of his victory.
The prophecy ends with a paradox. Lucifer's failure is also his reincarnation.
Damn it, Theo. You could have told me more.
Lucifer is released, but not as a powerful omnipotent being, but instead forced into the feeble body of a mortal, unprepared for the demonization. Unable to access his arcane powers, his greatest triumph has become his ultimate undoing. He succeeded in leaving the afterlife and walking amongst mankind, but what can he achieve? He's stuck as a fragile mortal, no stronger than the humans Edward had defeated before. It's a good ending for humanity, where Lucifer will soon be defeated, assuming mankind recovers from the events that destroyed Manhattan. As far as we know, this was only localized to the immediate metropolitan area, so everywhere else in the US and indeed the world should be fine. Still, it's a tragic conclusion for Combi, who is once again forever alone. His apprentice is dead, the life he knew before he found the Philosopher's Stone is long gone, and the first person he's connected with in decades, one who, for whatever reason, cared about him, has sacrificed herself to save him from further satanic agony. Combi saved humanity, however he finds himself isolated in a world that no longer resonates with him, a sentiment underscored by Lucifer's farewell.
Do you love me?
Yes.
More than your memories?
They're the past.
Would you fight me? What will you do now? Kill me?
This ending feels underwhelming and, based on what I've seen in other retrospectives, confused players because it isn't clear that this was humanity's victory. Even the fandom wiki gets it wrong. From the player's perspective, Lucifer still returned and won. I don't think the riddle needed to be explicitly explained, with Venus, i.e. Sarah, becoming the lock that holds Lucifer. Still, it would have been preferable if the player could deduce these details on their own via Lucifer's reaction. He should have been angry at this erroneous development. Rather than just lashing out at Edward, we should have seen him flustered and confused by his new host body. Remember, he had expected to embody Combi, the body he had been prepping through his stone necklace for 70 years. We can see the difference this makes in the bad ending, where Lucifer has the magical powers to levitate Hermes and summon his army to pass through the portal. I don't blame Edward for walking away. Understandably, he wouldn't be able to pull the trigger himself, but Hermes should have ended with a line about how mankind will stop Lucifer with ease, or give Hermes an even bigger redemption and have him push Lucifer to his death himself. mirroring a similar scene in the bad ending. Defeating Lucifer was why Hermes betrayed the stone's possession in the first place. If we choose to shoot Sarah instead, the Lightbringer's plans succeed, and Edward's soul is destroyed and replaced. Hermes condemns our choice, exclaiming that
the last free act of man was murder.
So was his first free act.
Only in this ending, when faced with impending doom, does Hermes warn Lucifer that humanity will stand against him.
Men will stand against you.
Did you think I'd come alone?
Of course, the devil wasn't biding his time in the afterlife doing nothing, as we hear a distant marching suggesting a prepared force of demons is on its way. Between the hammy dialogue, rushed love interests, and story beats that blow past the player unless they take the time to digest what's happening deeper than the characters ever do, only a complete redesign from the ground up could save this narrative. Despite how unexplained they are, the plot points could still work if given time to breathe across a longer game. Ironically, Eden Games' excitement that an episodic form factor would benefit pacing worked against them, as they foolishly believed that faster was better. There were plans to release DLC episodes which may have helped tie up the story, but obviously these were cancelled. Nadal's expression when discussing the story to Game Reactor says it all. He claims he is satisfied, but from his tone it doesn't seem he cares that much about it, or perhaps doesn't believe in the story that much at all.
Trying to have the narration on the story being a strong part of the game in this area specifically, I think we are making something really interesting. So I'm quite satisfied with the result that we achieved so far.
A friend of mine mentioned with how ambitious the design was, that the designers may have been using the platform as a means to prove their ambition and forward-thinking ability, essentially using the AITD IP as a CV. This ties into the marketing focusing so much on tech demos and game mechanics than actual gameplay or the story. Researching the career progression of those on the design team, and there does seem to be some truth to that theory. 8 of the 15 members of the designer team went on to eventually hold lead and senior roles across a smorgasbord of AAA, Ubisoft and Arcane Studio products. They may not be the greatest lineup of masterpieces, but neither is AITD 08. What they are games that often innovated, even if only to a minor degree, as much innovation as can be expected for a AAA Ubisoft title anyway. Jerome Braun went on to be game systems designer for Dishonored 2 and Deathloop. Those aren't games that stuck to boring conventions. Emile Morel was lead game designer for the excellent rebirth of the Rayman series and a return to its 2D roots. Sebastian Judet headed the world designer team for Watch Dogs Legion, which had an excellent rendition of London. Julian Jourdain became a lead level designer for Tom Clancy's The Division, and both he and Judet then progressed to lead level designers for Star Wars Outlaws, which was a trite, buggy game, but the environments were absolutely beautiful. Hakeem Abbas became technical director for many Assassin's Creed titles, Nicolas Toucart became a senior level and quest designer on Greedfall, and Noor Poloni, the producer, is now studio head of Beanox, a 300 employee strong Call of Duty support studio. There's certainly a few misses in their catalogues, and depending on your biases, you can just as much see this as proof that those responsible for AITD 08 being a bad game went on to create similarly less than stellar products. The idea though that recruiters would look at AITD not as a sum of its parts, but as a proof of concept of what these designers were trying to pioneer, seems to have some truth to it. Of course, not everyone was able to leverage as much success out of the burning rubble. As lower members of the design team, those mentioned so far were likely able to scrub themselves of the failures of the game when questioned. The ones at the very top were not so lucky. The game director and technical directors are still at Eden Games, their latest accomplishment being Smurfcart. And the lead game designer, the Emile Pagliarulo of France, did not manage to fall upwards in the same way, at first anyway. His most recent released title, now as game director, being a forgettable horror game with a mediocre critical reception, and the titles between that and AITD 08 certainly not standing out as career highlights. He has recently found himself as the game director on upcoming Amazon MOBA March of Giants, so who knows, maybe he will finally redeem himself. And then there's the real victim here, not Eden Games' reputation or the loss of future DLC or potential sequel, but the cancellation of a near one-to-one remake for Alone in the Dark 1992. Discovered via the portfolio of ex-Eden Games employee Guillaume Colombe. Around 2011, a small internal team experimented with bringing back the classic as a digital title aiming at the Xbox Live Arcade online store. Combi's 2008 model was adjusted to perfectly replicate his original visage, and the attic room that game starts in was recreated as a vertical slice to wet the lips of Atari. According to a blurb attached to the now deleted employee portfolio entry, the setting and atmosphere would have been faithful to the original title, mostly focusing on graphical updates and modernized controls, with differences to some puzzles to place more focus on the management of light. Unfortunately, Atari didn't give the green light for the project to continue, probably due to the anti-single-player directive installed by Phil Harrison. With how popular remakes became during the 8th generation, had Atari held on to the IP just a little while longer and not ravaged it with the god-awful Illumination entry, just maybe this promising idea could have come to fruition. So, should you play Alone in the Dark 2008? No. This isn't a hidden gem, nor is it underrated. If anything, the Metacritic scores are quite kind. What makes AITD 08 so impressive and interesting is evident in this video. Playing it for yourself to interact with these mechanics in-game won't add anything. The only person this may appeal to is hardcore fans of open-world survival games like DayZ, who want to experience what that was like in 2008, with just as much, if not more, jank than DayZ. Ironically, the style of gameplay that broke the game's narrative pacing the most works best in a standalone fashion. The root puzzles are engaging and diverse enough, and there's a fair whack of creativity to be had taking on the Human's Horde. Just boot up the game from Chapter 2 of Episode 8 and you're golden, no need to be bogged down by the story at all. I'm hard pressed to find any game that quite matches its combination of avant-garde design, nonsensical writing, and unforgivable lack of quality control. If you're enamored by experimental game design and can accept a lack of polish, even I, as a Daggerfall apologist, find appalling, then maybe there's something for you here. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it and want to help me make more stuff like it, I have a Patreon and YouTube memberships, which offer early access to videos and exclusive behind the scenes content for just £1. A huge thank you to all of the current members. If you would like to talk to me, you can hit me up on the Jwlar Discord channel. Links to all of these are in the video description, along with links to the full written essay and bibliography. Pukek97 asks, if the New Nightmare had a successful sequel, what do you think it would be? Cut content from the New Nightmare would also be something. Well, I certainly intend to cover the New Nightmare in the future, so we'll be delving into the cut content then. That's the funny thing about the New Nightmare though, it performed admirably with critics, maintained much of the Lovecraftian direction from the original, and sold 1.4 million units. Why Infogrames didn't continue the series is quite baffling. Sure, the game was desperately in the shadows of Resi Evil 3, but it was using the flashlight in more inventive ways. And with Capcom's flagship horror series essentially on hiatus until 2005, there was room for at least one more Alone in the Dark from Darkworks to eke out whatever they could from that old formula. We can maybe assume that Cold Fear was meant to be their AITD sequel, and for whatever reason, Atari SA granted the IP to Eden Games instead. Biofox asks, how do you feel about the original setting the standard for games like Resident Evil and what it became years later? Disappointed comes to mind. At this point I have to assume the brand itself is cursed. It's been passed around to 3 developers across 3 entries, 4 if you count Illumination, which I don't, and despite decent sales, there is never any faith placed in the developers to continue. The blame has to fall on Infogrames/THQ Nordic. For whatever reason, to them, anything less than Game of the Year and a place on the bestsellers of the decade list isn't worth the time. Both Darkworks and Pieces Interactive were onto something, and yet the latter was killed off, and Darkworks were left to try once more with the genre until they too were left for dead when they were taken off I Am Alive once it entered development hell. Firefox also asks, what are your thoughts on the horror genre having changed more to action games since the PS3 era and beyond? It was the inevitable direction when Resident Evil 4 became the standard. Still, I would say the genre hasn't lost its charm entirely because of it, although the recent trend of remakes does imply a loss of new inspiration. I'm still waiting for a good spiritual successor to PT myself. Since Amnesia: The Dark Descent, I personally believe that immersive first-person horror games carry the torch better when it comes to actually being frightening. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.